Welcome. We are continuing with the series on Bhagavad Gita. In the first episode, we had a brief introduction into Gita. We focused on the question of why is it relevant, who spoke the Gita and what is the relevance of that, how to study Gita, what is the approach to study Gita or any such text, and finally, what Gita is not. Now, in this episode, we'll go deeper into the question of the relevance of Gita, because establishing this relevance very clearly as it applies to our lives is very important before we go into the chapters and the verses and so on. So, the primary question to explore then is, what is the central theme of Bhagavad Gita and how does that relate to my life? This is the question we want to explore today. And this in turn becomes four questions. We'll go one after another. The first question, really, that we are all interested in is that we always want something. So the question really is, what do we want? Do we know what we want? What are we seeking? So if we analyze what we are seeking broadly and look at the categories in which all our seeking takes place, we first see that a lot of our seeking is for security. We look for financial security, we look for emotional security, we look for social security, we look for security through identification with a particular religion or nation or any group. So we look for security, and seeking security is a very common thing among humans. We see that. And this is because we are by ourselves feeling insecure. If we look at it closely, we realize that there is an inherent feeling of insecurity within us because of which we are looking for security. This looking for security is called in Sanskrit as artha, essentially acquiring wealth, all kinds of wealth to mitigate this feeling of insecurity. Once we feel a bit secure, though the feeling of insecurity never totally goes away, we put it aside and we start looking for pleasure. This is again because we can see that we are displeased with ourselves. There is boredom. One cannot be with oneself. So, because of this, we are looking for getting pleased elsewhere. That is the seeking of pleasure through experiences, through entertainment, through travel, and so many other activities. This seeking of pleasure is called in Sanskrit as kama. And this pleasure seeking also is again because we feel a deep sense of being displeased and we are trying to run away from that. And once we go past that a little bit, even though again we are never truly pleased with ourselves, but at least we realize that seeking pleasure has its limit, then we start looking for a certain sense of connectedness. We realize that there are people around us who are suffering and therefore we have to help them, or there is environment around us that is hurting and so on. So there is a need to feel connected with people and things and the environment around us. And this is called dharma in Sanskrit. Dharma is all the activities that we do which go beyond the feeling of insecurity and the feeling of being displeased, but still feeling a certain sense of lack of connectedness. And therefore, out of that realization, awakening to a certain level of sensitivity to others around us, to other places, people, environment, and so on. So, this is definitely an evolution in one's seeking, and yet it can be very partial because people get then identified with various fragmentary causes, such as environment or a particular form of poverty or a particular form of disease prevention, and so on and so forth. So, even dharma has its limitations, as we can see. So, essentially, we see that we are seeking either to be free from insecurity through wealth and other forms of wealth, artha. We are seeking to be free from being displeased through pleasure, kama, and we are seeking to be free from being disconnected through dharmic activities, which is dharma. So, if you look at it closely, then all our seeking is rooted in the desire to be free from insecurity, to be free from being displeased or bored, to be free from being disconnected or lonely or feeling isolated, and so on. So, essentially, consciously or unconsciously, one is always seeking to be free. This is the first thing for us to clearly realize. And this seeking of freedom is called moksha. And this is therefore considered the ultimate end or purushartha in Sanskrit. So, since the root of seeking is that I feel a lack in myself, a lack of security, a lack of pleasure, a lack of connectedness, I seek. I seek to be free of these lack or lacks, if you will. So I seek out. So this is the first thing to understand what I am seeking is that I am seeking freedom from lack within myself. So the next question then to focus is, why am I not finding it? Why is the solution not presenting itself whichever way I go? This is clearly because, first of all, the lack in myself is because I am feeling that I am limited. I am a body mind complex which is limited and finite in this infinite universe. So, when I seek wealth, whatever forms of wealth I seek and attain is also limited and finite. Whatever relationships I attain with people or with ideas is all limited and finite. Even ideas or ideologies and belief systems, heaven, paradise, all of that I create in my head is all thoughts which are again finite and limited. So any amount of acquiring finite things does not take away my insecurity, because I am insecure and whatever I'm acquiring is also limited and therefore insecure. Everything is fleeting. Same is true with pleasure. Any amount of pleasure I acquire from outside is also limited, and I am limited, and therefore there is no sense of feeling truly pleased. And equally so with things like philanthropy. No amount of charity and all other things with the intent of feeling connected or with the intent of fulfilling doesn't give full complete fulfillment, because again all these causes are fragmentary and limited. So not only do they not give me the freedom from insecurity, boredom, or loneliness, these activities or these endeavors to acquire wealth or acquire pleasures, they in turn become dependencies and they actually end up decreasing our freedom. So this is the second thing to recognize, is that looking for freedom unconsciously or even consciously in external ideas, objects, people, places, things is not solving the problem, and in fact, it's worsening the problem. Then now enters Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita offers a solution for this problem. Bhagavad Gita says that fundamentally, the reason we are seeking to be free, which is due to the lack we feel within ourselves, is due to ignorance. It is not that we are finite and limited, because if we are truly finite and limited, then we are stuck. There is no way out, so to speak. So Gita says the problem is not the lack in the self, because the idea of the self is wrong. It is a wrong understanding of the self, the ignorance of our true nature, that is causing us to feel this lack and in turn go in all kinds of directions looking for being free from these limitations. Now, this is not something to be simply believed into. This has to be inquired into, what Gita is saying. What Gita is saying is that you are already what you seek. So the solution is in the problem itself. You don't have to go outside the problem. You just have to study the problem, which is yourself, and the solution is within the problem itself. Because the self that you take yourself to be as the body mind is not truly yourself, but it is in turn or indeed pure awareness within which body mind exists, and within which all events and everything comes and goes, thoughts and ideas and perceptions, and all of it comes and goes. And therefore this pure awareness is free of time and space and free of all limitations. This is what Gita is saying. Again, as we said, we have to inquire into it, inquire into the truth of it, and see if it is a living reality for us rather than simply believing it. Because what Gita is saying is implying that we don't have to attain anything, we just have to understand our true self. So there is no becoming, only being. Thus, Gita is actually presenting the possibility of living in freedom now, not by attaining any ideas, or not by traveling to any particular destination, whether it be heaven or whether it be paradise, not in time, not in space, not after death, but here and now, living in freedom is what Gita offers. And so, this is what makes Gita extremely relevant for every one of us. And that is what we have to look into, study. And the last thing that we want to explore as part of this central theme of Gita, which Gita talks in great detail, is why does this understanding not appear in me? Is there anything that is preventing this understanding, or is it that it is false, and is it simply a belief system again? We already said that it is not a belief system because we have to test it for ourselves, and we have to inquire into it for that, and we have to realize the truth of it through our own inquiry and meditation. But Gita also says that for that to happen, there has to be purity of the mind. This is a very important aspect that is many times lost on all of us who are seeking. So, Gita says that understanding can dawn only in a pure mind. It is rightly said that blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Because the mind is always sullied by impressions of various actions that have been done with the sense of lack, with insecurity, with displeasure, with loneliness. And therefore, all of these impressions are there in the mind, and it is strengthening the false idea of the self as the body mind complex. So, there is a tremendous need for purification, is what Gita emphasizes, and we can see the truth of it because our actions are always rooted in insecurity, and therefore rooted in expectations and fears, and looking for credit and fearing blame and all of that. And therefore, Gita says that unless you purify that field, this understanding cannot dawn. So, one aspect of purification is, of course, the wisdom itself. Simply listening to this wisdom with great reverence, as we said, with Shraddha, which is sincerity and reverence and confidence that it can transform my understanding if I give it a chance. And having this reverence with which to listen to Bhagavad Gita or any such text, inquiring upon it, not just simply acquiring words or knowledge, but inquiring into it and meditating upon it. Not simply meditating, but meditating on the basis of one's inquiry. There are so many things that are going by as meditation techniques, and many of them are simply ways to hypnotize the mind, and or sometimes even just dull the mind. So, true meditation is based on inquiry. And therefore, what Gita says is there is a natural process to listen, inquire, and meditate. In Sanskrit, it's called Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. And this way is called Jnana Yoga, or inner renunciation. This is the way of Nivritti, to realize the inner wisdom of my true self through listening, understanding, contemplating, and meditating. But Gita also says the part of the purification process is in the field of the other big part of purification process is in the field of action, because simply listening, inquiring, and meditating does not provide the understanding as long as I am still acting with a sense of expectation and fear and all the things we talked about, because these actions bind me. I listen to something and I meditate upon it in the morning, and then I go out into the day, and my actions are completely rooted in this duality of expectation and fear and seeking credit and all of that. Then that bondage in the field of action is far more powerful. So one has to act the right way, because to not act and simply sit in a cave is not the answer. Even those sitting in a cave have to act to get their food and so on. So Gita prescribes the way of right action as well, which can greatly enable the purification of the mind. And this is by making every act an offering to the universe, offering to the divine in a spirit of surrender. And this makes every act sacred. This is the meaning of the word sacrifice in English too, to make something sacred. It's called yajna in Sanskrit. And so this is a big part of purification. Also, it involves many other things that Gita talks about, such as giving up unnecessary activities, being generous in spirit and with one's possessions, being moderate in food and sleep, because all of these things go toward the purification of the faculties, which enables us to realize the truth of our own being. So, all of this is called karma yoga, the field of action in which purification takes place. And this is the way for us to make our actions be fully engaged and yet not binding us. And this is called as pravritti. One other important thing to point out is we didn't talk about bhakti or devotion, because it underlies both pravritti and nivritti, or both the field of action and wisdom. How so? Because we talked about a spirit of surrender. So, the spirit of surrender in thought, word, and deed while acting requires that we recognize the perfect order of this infinite universe. We are taking ourselves to be a finite being while we are acting. And yet, if we at least recognize the infinite universe and the perfect order with which it functions, then that recognition of the infinite order is devotion. This infinite order is another name for God. And therefore, having the reverence and the sense of devotion to this infinite order to God is bhakti. And similarly, we talked about a spirit of reverence to the teaching while listening. And there is a benevolent factor that brings us to this teaching. It is not simply by chance that we come to a teaching like this. There is some factor at work, something within us that drives us to come to a teaching like this, and that factor is called as grace. And therefore a gratitude towards this factor called grace is also part of devotion. Therefore, both in the field of listening, or in the, which is to say, jnana, by having this great sense of gratitude and reverence to the teaching and the grace that has brought us to this teaching. And similarly, in the field of action, through a spirit of surrender to the infinite order, which is God, we can see the important role of devotion or love or bhakti. All of these are different terms for a sense of gratitude, for a sense of connectedness, and a sense of as I said, surrender and love to the entire universe, and therefore a love for everyone that we come across and everything that we come across. So that is the essence of Gita, is that it not only offers the solution, which it offers right away in the second chapter to be precise. And then there are 16 chapters after that where Gita talks in detail about the process of realization. The realization of the wisdom of our true self is a process. It is not a process in time in the sense that we have to attain something or we have to become something, but it is a process inwardly where every moment is unto itself uh, a sacrifice. That is why this word yajna is also used often in Gita, because making every moment a sacrifice in this great spirit of inquiry and realizing our true self is the essence of Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, there is a tremendous level of uh, detailed unfolding of this way of listening, and what are the various doubts that arise, and what are the answers to those doubts, and what is this conflict between action and knowledge, and why this conflict is a false conflict, and what are the ways in which action can be purified and instead of being binding, actually liberating. All of these things are detailed, are rather unfolded in great detail in 18 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. So, this is the central theme of Gita that we will go systematically uh, in the coming episodes. So, just to quickly recap, we see that again, the central problem we face, this is why we come to Gita, not because it's a holy book, as we already said. It is because it's offering something to our problem of living. The central problem of our living is we are constantly seeking something, and the seeking is coming out of a lack. So, we are seeking to be free of our lack. And this seeking to be free of our lack is our central problem. And the second thing we see is that because we feel a lack within, we also, though ignorantly, look for satisfying this lack by going outwardly. We see that everything outwardly is also limited and having the same lack that we perceive in ourselves. As long as we perceive ourselves to be finite and limited, we inherently perceive everything around us the same way, and therefore we are adding only finite and finite, and that can never become infinite. That can never be free of limitations. So, that is the second thing. The third thing is, what is the solution Gita offers, which is that the understanding is the problem, not the lack itself. Your understanding of yourself as a limited entity is fundamentally wrong, and you are pure awareness that is unlimited, infinite, and eternal in time and space. And the last thing we saw is Gita talks in detail about why this understanding is prevented from dawning within us and what is the process of purification necessary for this realization to dawn. So, with this, we will end this episode, and we will continue with the next episode on within a few days. Thank you.